screen. You see the screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So this morning, we're here gathered for our third web conference of the course International Negotiation Strategies. Welcome to all of you, and thank you for being here. The subject that we're going to talk about today is just like a bit of everything that we've seen. So we're going to talk about the styles and protocols of negotiation by country. So what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to talk about a definition of negotiation in international business. Then the importance of understanding cultural differences in negotiation. Next, the negotiation styles by region and country. We're going to talk about some key negotiation protocols across cultures, some practical tips for international negotiations, and then we're going to have our conclusion. So first of all, we're going to remember what do we understand for negotiation in international business. The definition, one of the definitions that we can find is that it's a strategic process where two or more parties from different countries or cultural backgrounds discuss issues to reach a mutually acceptable agreement or resolve disputes. It involves understanding and managing diverse needs, goals, and cultural differences to achieve those agreements, such as contracts, alliances, joint ventures, or commercial transactions across international boundaries. So those can be the results from an international negotiation in business. Some key aspects, some key aspects include that it's dynamic and complex interaction that requires cultural sensibility. So we've been talking about the cultural background and the cultural knowledge, strong communication skills, and flexibility regarding different business practices. The goal is often to find a win-win solution where all parties have a benefit, emphasizing on problem solving and relationship management. The successful of international negotiation demands awareness of cultural, legal, and economic factors that influence business behaviors, such as decision-making styles, communication norms, and market conditions. This process of negotiation is something that we do in a voluntary way, and the parties, they modify offers and expectations to come closer to the agreement, often involving preparation, information exchange, bargaining, and closing the deal. International business negotiations is a critical skill for expanding business activities globally and establishing long-term mutually beneficial commercial relationships. This is short explanation of what we understand of negotiation in international business, and also has those important key elements that we have to consider in the process. So we've been talking through this period of time, how important is the culture, how important is the communication. Sometimes there are things that we don't consider important, and at the end, on the process of negotiation, those are key elements that are going to decide to help us to make the process successful or a failure. So how important is to understand those cultural differences in negotiation. Sometimes you may think that we just repeat and repeat and talk about the culture, the multicultural situation, the knowledge that we need to have about the cultures. But in the practice, the understanding of the culture is very important. So that's why we emphasize on the cultural element, because sometimes we don't understand the relevance of this element in the process of negotiation. So when we talk about the importance of understanding the cultural differences in negotiations, we have to consider those elements that are important and why it is important. For example, first of all, avoiding misunderstandings and conflicts. Different cultures interpret the same words, actions, and gestures differently. Maybe before I was telling you that in the way that we move our hands, the expression of our face, sometimes we say something and with our face we're saying something different. And we have to be very careful with those elements, because sometimes those elements are more important than what we're saying. So it depends on the culture that they will understand or interpret the same words, the same actions, or the gestures in a different way. Sometimes we consider, because we speak Spanish and maybe most of the American countries, the Latin American countries speak Spanish, so it's going to be easy for us to make us understand. But sometimes the meaning of the same words is different depending on the country. So we have to be aware of that. Without this cultural awareness, negotiators risk misinterpretations, intentions, leading to misunderstandings or offense that can delay negotiation. So it is very important to be aware how do we use the language, how do we use the gestures, how we use the actions, how we manage our body and the situation, because maybe we're giving a different messages from the one that we want to give. The second is adapting communication and negotiation styles, means managing. So cultures vary from communication styles. Sometimes they are more direct and some others are indirect. Some cultures, they prefer to go fast in the process of negotiation. Some others, they just prefer to go slow. In some cultures, it is very important, the formality and the process of decision making. And recognizing these differences is going to help the negotiators to adapt the approach to fit the counterpart's culture, fostering smoother interactions and trust building. So we have to be aware again about the preferences that the counterpart has about the process of negotiation. You know, some cultures, they just meet to go straight forward through the process of negotiation. Some other cultures just prefer to establish first a relationship between the parts, and after to continue with the process of negotiation. So first to know everybody and to know the company, and after talk about the business. In some other cultures, they just want to meet and go through the process and do it as fast as they can. But also when a culture goes like straightforward, is because sometimes they have that strategy, and also they have clear the process, and they have like a limit of time. Third, well, I had the problem here. It's the third one means managing expectations and building trust. The cultural norms influence what negotiators expect regarding relationship building, hierarchy, and contract flexibility. Understanding these norms enables negotiators to meet counterparts' expectations, establish rapport, and create a foundation of long-term partnership. So this is very important, because for some cultures it's more relevant to build this trust to know the other part, and not just to make a business for the moment, but maybe to continue in the time, because they want to build a strong relationship, to get trust between the parts, and then to make the business to continue, to make it a long-term partnership. So those elements are very important to know if the counterpart is interested in those, and how are we going to manage the situation, and what's the expectation that we have with that counterpart. We need to know, to get knowledge of the culture about those situations, because that makes difference in the process of the negotiation. Next one is enhancing negotiation outcomes. It means that research shows that cross-cultural negotiations often face communication barriers, leading to poorer outcomes. So listen, the reality of the process of negotiation is showing us that sometimes we don't have enough knowledge, and that means a trouble, a problem, a barrier in the process of negotiation. So if we don't know anything about the other culture, if we don't understand uh, how they behave, then that means that we're going to have troubles in the process, because if we don't know how to deal with this situation, then we're not going to get any outcome from there. So, however, negotiators who overcome these barriers by managing cultural differences effectively can achieve more creative and mutually beneficial agreements than same culture negotiations. So, the success comes from the knowledge of the other culture, and how are we going to manage the situation, and to answer to what the counterpart is willing to do. So we really need to know about the culture and the negotiation culture that the other part, the counterpart, has. Preventing cultural stereotyping and exploitation. This is very important, because sometimes we have a stereotype of a culture, and we think that the short information that we have is enough for the process, and that we're going to be able to deal with the process just with that information. And that is a huge mistake. We really need to know about the culture of the negotiators, and the culture that they have from the country where they belong to. But also it is important to know more about the trajectory that they have in processes of negotiation. I'm going to make a parallel maybe with it just came to my mind. When there is a match, an international match of football, or well, any match of football, the football team, the leader of the football team, uh, most of the times needs to analyze how the other team is going uh, to manage the situation. And how do they do? They go to the recording of the other matches that the other party is playing. So this is the process of letting know how do they play. How, and the process of negotiation is like a game. It's moving the elements, the parts, um, to get a result, a successful result. So when we go to football, it's the same. So if Colombia is going to play with against Brazil, for example, well, the team leader is going to watch, and all the players know, they're going to watch all the other football matches from Brazil, to understand what's the strategy that they have, and also to watch the previous match that they have between Colombia and Brazil. So this is a way that they're going to understand and to know how the others are playing, and how are they going to manage the situation, like the probabilities, how they're going to play, what's the strategy that they're going to to develop. So this is very important, and in the process of negotiation in international business is the same. You have to know how do they manage the process of negotiations, and how do they deal with, and how do they behave with the counterparts. So this is an important example that you have to know and not just think that I have an idea, maybe because they're Chinese, maybe because they're American and they're going to behave this way. No, the stereotyping is a mistake that we can fall in. So while culture matters, focusing solely on cultural stereotypes can be misleading. Successful negotiators look beyond culture to understand individual behaviors and intentions, discerning whether counterpart seeks collaboration or exploitation, thereby avoiding being misled by cultural smoke rings. So this is very important just to avoid the stereotyping that we can have about a culture or a company. Reducing stress and cognitive biases, cultural stressors, and stereotypes can cause negotiators to default to cultural biases under pressure. Awareness and strategies to reduce stress help maintain open-minded and rational decision-making during negotiations. So we have to deal with the situation. The knowledge that we have about the counterpart give us confidence about the process. So if we deal process of negotiation in a huge stress situation, we're not going to be completely clear to have all the tools that we need to deal with the situation. So it is very important to manage the stress, but by managing, I mean to have a good knowledge and to trust the knowledge that we have. So the preparation is very important. Understanding those cultural differences is essential for the effective communication, for this process of trust building, the negotiation success of international business. Ignoring those cultural risks, the negotiation failure while managing it well offers a competitive advantage and the potential of more stable lasting agreement. So the knowledge that we have about culture and the capability that we have to deal with the process of communication, to express our message in a good way is very important to get good results from the process that we're dealing with. So this is how important the cultural differences are in international negotiations when we talk about business. Negotiation styles by region and country. We have to make a differentiation because not always all the countries belonging to a region are going to have the same culture. One of the examples is Europe. Maybe we consider that all Europeans deal or manage the situation the same way, and that is not true. That's going to be different depending from the country. So I'm going to give you some tips and some cases from different countries and different depending on the regions. So we're going to start by the Western countries that includes the countries from Europe. So we start from the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a style very moderate on the negotiations. They balance between assertiveness and politeness. They're very polite. And then less frequent interruptions, and they prefer a clear communication, like very straightforward and very clear and very polite. For English people, politeness is very important. So this is an element that we have to consider, like the way we're dressing, how we conduct and respect the other people, and to make them to name the people for in the right way. So it's very we must be careful about the respect that we have with the counterpart, in this case being with UK. In the case of French, in France, they're vigorous and logical debate style. They always like to debate. They have aggressive tactics, including threats and warnings are common, and they focus on the intellectual argumentation. So just this difference, in the case of the UK, they're very polite. They don't like much interruptions and they just want a clear communication. In the case of France, which is a neighbor, they have aggressive tactics and they can include some threats and warnings. and they care about the intellectual argumentation. So it's very different. Now we move to Germany, which is a neighbor of France, and they are very direct. They're fact-based, so they need just data, information, numbers. They are very structured. They emphasize on tough preparation and punctuality. This is very important for German negotiators, the punctuality, preparation, the structure, and the database that we have. Now we move north to the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries, so countries such as Sweden, Finland, and Norway. Three neighbors, but they have differences. In the case of Sweden, they are wide-ranging discussions and consensus-driven, so there is more negotiation. Finland is concise, top-down agreement building, which means that they go from the general idea to the details. And Norway is an intermediate between Sweden and Finland, just like a mix of both. Then we move south south of Europe, and we go to Italy and Spain. In the case of those countries, they're highly expressive, as you know. They just express themselves not just with words, but with their hands and the face and the movements of the body. So they're very expressive, they're verbose and flexible, and they use eloquence and emotional appeal to persuade. So they use the emotion to persuade the others. In the case of Netherlands, which is a neighbor of France and Germany, they fact focus a bit more like Germans, but extensive debate. They like to debate like the French, and decision often delayed due to overanalysis. So they talk longer. Maybe the Germans go more straightforward, and the Netherlands, they want to go through the process of analysis of the information. Moving from Europe to the Asian countries, we have China, which is one of the main countries that we sometimes analyze in the process of negotiation, because those countries are going to be very different from what we know. In the case of China, the meeting is going to focus on information gathering. They just want to learn and to know the most they can about the other company. The realization often is made outside of formal meetings. So I once was telling you that for the Chinese, it's very important to meet in another environment, maybe to meet in a dinner. And maybe in those environments, they're going to make those decisions and not just in the business meetings. And they're more direct than Japan, but still they're very subtle. In the case of Japan, they have an indirect communication. They emphasize on harmony and relationship building, and the decision is made by consensus after prolonged discussions. In the case of China and Japan, they don't go through a very fast process of decision making. They can take time, and they usually have a long-term relationship that they want to build. We're moving to India. India is ambiguity is accepted, truth and appearance are negotiable. They prefer the bottom-up agreement building. So they start with the details to go to the general idea, and decisions often made by a single leader, but input from middle-level negotiators. So in this bottom-up agreement, they just start to gather information, to build from the details of the negotiation of the business. They have different level negotiators that are going to gather this information, and all of that is going to build the process that goes to the head of the company with all the information, and only the head is going to take the decision. South Korea is energetic and fast-paced negotiations, and sometimes stretch the truth to close deals quickly. So in the case of the Asian countries, to build this relationship and to have trust in each other is very important to go faster in the process. In Singapore, relationship building is key before negotiation, ensure and calculate once relationship is established. So it's very important that once we got their trust, we have to be fair with that and to take care of that trust that we are building with them. Then we have Indonesia, differential and ambiguous conversation style and avoid all direct confrontation. So it's quite different. We move now to Latin America. In the case of Brazil, they are aggressive and expressive negotiators. They use commands and direct language common. In the case of Mexico, they balance approach. They less aggressive than Brazil or Spain, and there is a mix of verbal and not verbal communication, which is a difference between Brazil and Mexico. We move to Africa. In the case of Zambia, one of the many countries in Africa. In Zambia, flexibility and commitment add value. Expect handling and high initial prices, so there is a chance to bargain with them. A name of win-win outcomes through compromise. So there is a kind of we need to help each other, so we're going to win both parts, but we need to compromise and to trust. So this is just one example of Africa because there are so many countries in Africa and not all of them are the same. Australia, loose and frank conversation style. They expect a literal interpretation of the statement. So we have to be clear on the communication and the language that we're using. A limited tradition of bargaining and focus on win-win outcomes with a small margin of compromise. So this is like a general idea of the case of few countries and different regions in the world and how each of them have different elements that are going to be important in the process. It's just like a general idea, but you're not going to take those few ideas to go through the process of negotiation in any case. It's just like a general idea, and from that, you have to go deep and learn more about the process of negotiation. And maybe we have to understand that it depends. If we look at our country, if we look as in a mirror, we can see that Colombia has different types of negotiation depending on the region. So we have to consider that maybe if we go to huge countries such as China, maybe the process of negotiation is going to have some differences between regions that is not going to be the same maybe in Shanghai or Beijing or Guangzhou or Shenzhen or Chongqing. So we have to know that maybe there is a national culture, but into that national culture, we need to see the differences between regions, because it's not the same here in Colombia to deal a negotiation process with someone from the North Coast, someone from Cali, and someone from Bogota, which is different. So we have to be aware of those differences into the same countries. Look at the differences between size. Colombia is very tiny compared with China, but still being so small regarding the size of China, still we have differences in our country. So this is very important for you to be aware and to take care of. Key negotiations protocols across cultures. I think that we had already talked about a little about this. First of all, the communication style, and in some cases the communication goes very direct. In some others is more indirect. So we have to know these elements from country to country, from culture to culture, which is the preferred depending on the culture. And the use of silence and nonverbal cues. In some countries, the people, they just prefer to go straight forward, to say what they think, and like to put all the possibilities on the table. But sometimes the other cultures, they just rely, for example, in the body language, in the expression of the face, in the expression of the hands, and how to behave as a group, and what do we communicate without talking. So it is very important because sometimes our body is saying something different from what we're naturally saying. So we have to be aware of that and how important is for the counterpart that non-speaking language, that silence and the non-verbal communication that we're having, because that's going to make a difference. Decision making. In some cases, the decision is made just by the head of the company. In some other cases, as I was telling you, in different countries, is made by a consensus of the parts involved in the process. Sometimes the decision comes top down, so they go like having a general idea and they go to the details of the process. And sometimes it goes bottom up, which means that it starts from the details and finishes with the big idea. So we have to be aware of what's the process that we're going to deal with. So how important is for us to start by the big idea, or how important is for us to start with the details of the process. Relationship orientation, task focus versus relationship focus. Some cultures, they just go for the negotiation process, for the deal, to seal the deal. Some others, they just go first to build trust, to build relationship, and then they're going to look at the process of negotiation. The importance of trust and rapport before business. Some cultures, they prefer just to build a relationship between the parents, to know each other, to build some trust, and then they go through the business. And some others, they don't care about building any relationship. They just go for the opportunity and to deal with the business and just for that. So we have to be aware of that too, because we're not going to lose time trying to build a relationship, a trust, where the counterpart doesn't care about it and maybe sees us like we're losing time, we're wasting time, and we're not going through to the point that they want. Negotiation pace is fast closure versus prolonged discussions. I was saying that before. How important is for us to go just through the process of negotiation because it's a culture that just focus on the task, or how do we have to consider a prolonged discussions because what we need is to build a relationship, a trust, and after we look for the business. And the use of emotions, logical and detached versus emotional and expressive. I was saying that some cultures, such as the Italian and Spanish, maybe they use the emotions to persuade the other part. And there are some others that are detached from the emotions, such as maybe more Northern European countries, which are just more focused on the task. So look at those different elements that are very important: communication, decision making, relationship orientation, negotiation piece, and use of emotions. Something such as human as emotions, how important is a process in the process of negotiation when we're talking about business. Sometimes we think that business is just so impersonal and just belongs to the company, but at the end, emotions in some cases are very important in those processes. So it is very, very important for us to know those key negotiation protocols across cultures, because those may sometimes they make the difference. Sometimes they are going to deal with the difference, and it's going to determine the successful or the failure on the process of negotiation that we have. So those key negotiation protocols across culture are elements that you always have to take care of, to look at, and to be aware of. Some practical tips for international negotiators. Well, those are like general ideas in the process when you're going to start the process of negotiation. Of course, that you have to go deeper and to learn more and to understand more. But those are like the general elements that you have to always consider. First thing, you have to understand communication styles. Research whether the culture prefers direct, explicit communication or a more indirect, subtle approach. For example, in the case of East Asian cultures, use high context communication where nonverbal cues are important, whereas the Western cultures often use low context, explicit verbal communication. So adapt the communication style according to the situation is going to help you to avoid misunderstandings. So we really need to know and to understand those communication styles. If the counterpart goes direct or indirect, if they care about the nonverbal communication, or if they just care about what we're saying. This is the first one. The second one talks about respecting hierarchical structures. Sometimes for some culture, it is very important, the hierarchy. Learn about the role of hierarchy and authority in the other culture. In some cultures, decisions are made by senior leaders and require formal respect and deference, while others use consensus-based decision-making. Knowing who the key decision makers and how to address them is crucial. Sometimes the company sends some people for the process to start the process of negotiation to gather all the information, to go through an analysis, and then the head is going to decide if it's worth to go through the process or not. Sometimes just the people who go through the process of negotiation are going to deal to have a consensus and to decide. So we really need to know how hierarchical is the company, how hierarchical is the structure of the company and the culture, because it depends. I was showing you maybe in the last time, like the differences between cultures about these elements of hierarchical and direct and indirect communication. So it is very important to consider. Maybe we repeat and say those things. Why? Because sometimes in the process of negotiations, those processes, they fail because we don't have a really good knowledge about those basic elements that are very important in the process of negotiation. Adapting to time perceptions. Research whether the culture is monochronic, the values punctuality and strict deadlines, or polychronic, more flexible with time and focus on relationship building. For example, rushing negotiations may offend partners in cultures that emphasize patience and long-term relationships. So it is very important, I was telling you before, to know if you really have an idea of the counterpart, if they are going to consider like a long-term process, or if they just go straight to the task and decision. Because sometimes we can assume a situation that is not going to follow, and then we're going to have misunderstandings and have some mistakes that are going to make us fail in the process. So we really need to know what type of culture are we dealing with. If they're very strict with punctuality or with deadlines, if they really have like a process, exactly time decided for the process, or if they don't have any limit of time and they can take some, like, as long as they can in the process. So it is very important for us to adapt to the time perception that they have. Building relationship and trust. Again, investigate the importance of relationship building rituals such as small talk, gift giving, or formal introductions. In many cultures, trust and personal connections precede business decisions, so taking time to establish rapport is essential. For example, building relationships and trust. In the case of Eastern countries, they're going sometimes to give you a present. And for them, when you get a present, for them it's important for you just to take the present, to put it aside, and once you're home, you're going to look at what they gave you. And that's the way how it goes. But in the case of Western, maybe in our culture, if someone gives you a gift, if you get a gift from someone, the other person what is waiting for, that you're going to open the gift and to be surprised and to give you thank you and to be very happy of the present that you received. So it's just such a small element that makes a difference. In an Eastern country, you're not going to open the gift once you get it. You have to wait until you get home because otherwise it's going to be rude. In the case of Western countries, you're not going to wait until you get home because that's going to be rude. Those are tiny elements that sometimes we think like that's not important, but it is important for some cultures. For some cultures, it is even important even the way you eat in a dinner, how you take the food. And there are so many tiny elements that are very important in those processes. And moreover, when you are in a process of building trust and building relationships. So those are elements that you have to consider in the process of building relationships and trust. Learning a specific business etiquette, study local customs such as greetings, handshakes, and bows, dress code, gift-giving norms, and dining etiquette. For instance, in Iranian culture, shaking hands with women may be avoided due to religious norms. For example, as women, we're not going to have a handshake in Iran. Understanding these customs helps avoid unintentional disrespect. So as women, we're not going to judge the other cultures. They didn't handshake with me, so that's rude. No, it's their culture, and we have to adapt to the other cultures. So we have to respect those cultures. It doesn't mean that we're less or we're more or we're higher or they're higher. No, we're all the same, but we have to respect their culture. So for their culture, they're not going to handshake with women. Okay, that's perfect. No deal with it. Okay, so those are elements that we need to learn about the business etiquette. Tiny elements that make the difference. Understanding contractual norms. Research how formal and or flexible contracts tend to be in the culture and how legal and ethical norms influence negotiations. Some cultures prefer detailed formal contracts, others prefer flexible agreement based on trust. So also we need to be aware of the legal situation and how do they prefer, if they want to be very detailed or if they prefer something just based in trust. So elements that we maybe not considering, but it's very important. It's like an etiquette of the contractual norms. And cultural training. Organizations often conduct cultural training sessions covering business etiquette, communication styles, negotiation tactics, and hierarchy to prepare negotiators for specific markets. This training helps employees avoid the stereotypes and better understand the rationale behind cultural behaviors. So if we have the chance to get a training on this process, on the knowledge of this culture is very important because this training is going to give us tips, elements that are going to be very well received in the process of negotiation and is going to help us getting a win-win result of the negotiation. So sometimes I feel like we repeat a lot different elements, but the thing is that based on the reality, sometimes people consider that maybe those things are just written in documents and the reality is going to be different. But when we emphasize on those elements, it's because in the process of negotiation, so many people has failed because they were never concerned about those important elements on the process of negotiation. So it is very important for us to be clear on the knowledge of the culture, and knowledge of the culture is not just if the religion or the food, but so many different elements, the etiquette on the business process, the contractual norms, just the time perception, the hierarchy, the structures, how do they communicate for them, how important is the way that we talk, how we manage our body, the nonverbal communication. So sometimes we think that those are tiny elements, but it's incredible how those tiny elements are very important in the process of negotiation in an intercultural process. So it is very important for us to consider those elements. So some conclusions by now, the negotiation styles and protocols vary widely across countries due to the cultural differences. It's very important. Just look at our country and that is different from region to region. Successful international negotiation requires cultural awareness, flexibility, and strategic adaptation. Emphasizing collaboration and compromise often leads to better outcomes in diverse cultural settings. So the idea of this presentation is to give you more tips about the elements that we need to look at in the process of intercultural negotiation, how the protocols are, the styles, and those elements that we need to be aware when we're dealing in a process of negotiation in business in an intercultural environment. How important are those elements in those processes of negotiation? So by now, I would like to know if you have any questions, if you want to share something, if you have some ideas. You can write on the chat. Just let me know. Or you can open the microphone and talk. Do you consider that the information that I just gave you is useful? Okay, Diana, all good for you? You're welcome, Diana. I don't know if you have any doubt. You're welcome, Valentina. If you want to get more information, to learn more, you can just contact me. I'm going to start a semillero de investigación. In that semillero, I want just to be able to share different information about international business, international negotiation. So if you want to be part, it's more, I'm going to be more like a support group where we can talk about different situations that you can deal with in the program in the university, and also to have a place where we can talk about international situation, international actuality, international news, and to have like a meeting every 2 weeks just for a short time to talk about different elements of this international environment, this international business, multicultural situations, and so many things are happening that are very important in the process of your professional development. So if you're interested, you're all welcome to be part. You can write me on Teams. So it's not more work. It's just like a moment of sharing ideas and information. I hope that everything is going fine. We're starting, Diana, what you're saying is true. These type of courses are very important because gives you the main ideas and elements for the process of negotiation in an international environment. And that's why it's very important for you to be part of this process of the web conference, and maybe to ask if you had doubts and to be in touch with us. The name of the semillero, we haven't decided because now we're just in the process of creating it. And the idea is just to focus on international elements, just to share what we know about it, and to build more knowledge about the international environment and international business. So if you're interested, just let me know through Teams so we can talk, okay? In the semillero, we're going to speak in Spanish, no worries. But in this course, it's 100% English, so everything must be in English. So Denise, if you want more information, if you want to be part, just let me know through Teams and we'll be in touch, okay? I hope this is going to be useful, and anything that you need, and if you want to know something about, like to go deeper in this type of information, just let me know and I'll be there, okay? Thank you very much. I hope that you're dealing with the activity. If you have any doubts, any troubles, just let me know, okay? Thank you very much and have a nice weekend. Bye bye.